Hi, it's Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. I am delighted to have with us for the first time Ned Price. Now, if those of you who remember way back in the before times when President Biden was in office, Ned for a time was the spokesman at the State Department. He later went on to other posts in the State Department. He is a longtime foreign policy expert. He is the perfect person to have on to discuss, frankly, a regional war that many of us did not anticipate, and certainly Donald Trump led us to believe would not occur on his watch. Ned, it is great to see you again.
Jen, it is great to be reconnected, and thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Let me start with kind of the basics.
Yeah.
Usually, when Israel says they have some startling new news, Israel has found that the Iranians are about to create a nuclear weapon. We would have the same or perhaps even better intelligence without giving away any state secrets here. But in this case, we didn't think this was going
Yeah.
on. Is he just playing Donald Trump? Is he just making stuff up for the world's consumption?
Jen, I think you're onto something. And when the Israelis started this operation about a week ago now, among the information they put out was what they called their golden information. And this was, as the prime minister described it previously, undisclosed intelligence information indicating that Iran had progressed on certain weaponization related activities. And importantly, this gets complicated, but weaponization is different from enrichment. We all know that Iran has been enriching. It's been enriching at too high levels ever since Trump tore up the Iran deal in 2018. But weaponization is the key component that is actually needed to build a bomb. If Iran wanted to turn that nuclear material into very high purity, highly enriched uranium and to build a bomb. Now, the US intelligence community, since the year 2007, has had the exact same conclusion. And that is namely that Iran was advancing a weaponization program up until the year 2003, more than 20 years ago, but halted their weaponization efforts in 2003. And the Supreme Leader has not reinitiated or reauthorized any weaponization activities ever since. This was the assessment that President George W. Bush himself, of course, no dove when it comes to Iran, first declassified. It was the assessment that was valid during the Obama administration. It was valid during the first Trump administration. It remained accurate during the Biden administration. We saw no intelligence to contradict it. And this is perhaps most important, Tulsi Gabbard, when she was up on Capitol Hill in March, testified to the United States Senate in written form, written testimony, this very same analytic line that Iran has not made the decision to advance weaponization efforts, those efforts that were halted in 2003. So the question is, what gives? You are absolutely right. When it comes to our intelligence relationships, we have no closer, no greater intelligence partner than Israel. There is very little that we don't share with the Israelis. We think, we hope, there is relatively little that the Israelis don't share with us. So one of two things is possible. Either the Israelis shared this information with us and we just found it not to be credible and it didn't change the underlying assessment, the assessment that has been buttressed over the course of 20 plus years, or Prime Minister Netanyahu just sort of made this up out of whole cloth and just threw it out there as he was announcing the start of hostilities. In any case, it is fundamentally important that the United States government, according to our intelligence community, which since last Thursday has not contradicted this at all, does not believe Iran is moving towards a nuclear weapon. Yes, their enrichment is a great concern. We should absolutely take steps to address it. But the idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying for 30 years now, as many of these clips have demonstrated, that Iran is at the absolute cusp of a nuclear weapon, that is not something that the United States intelligence community can corroborate.
Absolutely. Now, supposing that he did think, I'm going to go in. Now is a good time. Iran is back on its heels, and it has been. Its regional surrogates have been really decimated in many ways. I'm going to go in and really push this. So he makes up some elaborate facts to support this, and he goes in. But he knows going in that only the US can take out Fordo, which is this vast, deep, deep underground, and it is only the bunker busting bombs that can do it. They don't have it, we do. So he has launched a war, which he says is not just to set back, but to disable permanently, as if they couldn't build back anyway, but put that to the side. Disable permanently. But he cannot accomplish this without dragging the US into the war, and he doesn't have a firm commitment before going in what Trump would do. This is gobsmacking, and it should be gobsmacking to the Israelis. What is he doing? He's playing dice
Yeah.
with regional war.
Look, Bibi is a lot of things. One thing he is not, I don't think he's stupid. I don't think he is foolish. And I think what you're pointing to here is his assessment that unfortunately may well be proven correct, that he can bamboozle, beguile, and ultimately bully the American president into joining him. And I think his calculus may have gone something like this. Look, I'm hearing certainly not a red light from the Trump administration. I'm not exactly getting a green light. This enthusiastic go ahead, we'll be there with you. He probably heard something like a yellow light from President Trump when they last spoke. Maybe it was yellowish green. But he made the assessment that if he went ahead, President Trump would have no choice but to join him. That the political pressure that would be exerted on President Trump from many of the president's staunchest allies, from his favorite cable news channel, and many of his closest friends, would ultimately push the president in the direction of actively engaging, even if he wasn't wild about doing that in the first place. Here's the thing, Jen. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for 30 years, going back to President Bill Clinton, as I just mentioned a moment ago, has been voicing concern that Iran was on the cusp of a nuclear weapon. He has been pushing successive American presidents, essentially since Bill Clinton, to join Israel in an operation like this. Successive American presidents since Bill Clinton have stood by diplomacy. They have stood up for American interests, and they have very clearly said to the prime minister that this is a program that needs to be handled, but there are better, other, more durable, and actually permanent ways to do it. And going after Iran militarily is not a way to do it. Donald Trump, in his second term, is the first and only American president who, for whatever reason, has failed to stand up and has failed to prevent Prime Minister Netanyahu from launching a preemptive war of choice when diplomacy remained viable and diplomacy had not run its course. Diplomacy had not run its course last Thursday when this operation began. And even President Trump said it just moments before Israeli warplanes went into the skies over Iran. And in fact, he said, we're still in the midst of negotiation. I don't want to see this going forward. He very quickly changed his tune, but diplomacy was still viable. Diplomacy is still viable. It's going to be much, much harder, much more difficult now that the first missiles have been launched and bombs have fallen and civilians have been killed, but it's not impossible. As Americans, as certainly not only Democrats, but as liberal internationalists, as decent, principled individuals, we believe in the primacy of diplomacy. We believe that the use of force should be a last resort. If President Trump goes ahead with this, he will be throwing all of that away, and he will be embarking on a course of coercive use of force while diplomacy was still on the table.
And it's very interesting. The Prime Minister of Israel wouldn't have dared do this when President Obama was in the midst of negotiations because he would get all kinds of hell for having done it. But he feels comfortable enough, emboldened enough to undercut the president of the United States while we are at the negotiating table, which tells you something about Donald Trump's status in the world, his ability to influence events, his credibility. It's pretty stunning. I want to ask you because it is great to have a State Department hand available. Some of the nitty gritty parts where I would almost like to play the game tape and ask you to analyze what went wrong with this play. First of all, president's at the G7. He doesn't sign the agreement and he races back to the White House. Good idea, bad idea.
Look, if you're on the precipice of what could be a devastating war in the Middle East or a devastating war anywhere, in some ways, there's no better place to be than the G7,
Yes.
surrounded by our closest
Yes.
allies and partners, those with whom we would want to be coordinating to see to it that what would be, a pretty consequential conflict doesn't very quickly spiral out of control. And it's not like the president doesn't travel with all of the accoutrement of the presidency around him. He doesn't need to be in the Situation Room to receive classified updates. He doesn't need to be in the White House to convene his Secretary of Defense and his Director of National Intelligence and the Vice President, National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of State and others. The President of the United States can do that from his hotel room wherever he is. So it never made any sense to me. And the fact that he traveled back that evening and just sort of rushed away from the table, it always struck me as sort of a convenient excuse in a way.
Yes.
It's almost like he would rather be back sleeping in his own bed than having to, talk to President Macron of France or to the new prime minister of Canada or some of the people he clearly, very clearly, does not like. Maybe he just didn't want to see President Zelensky again, whom he was supposed to meet the next day. But his decision to do that never made sense on his face.
Now, I want to ask you for a comparison. At the end of the Afghanistan war, when President Biden did what no president before him had the nerve to do, which was end a war that was going nowhere, that was perpetual, that was fruitless. The State Department, and I had a bird's eye view of this when I was still at that other outlet, actually mounted what I think was the most extensive, the most impressive rescue operation of Americans, of surrogates, of Afghanis, of a population that I've ever seen. And I think by the time you were done, it was over 100,000 that you got out. You arranged flights, you created escorts, you tracked people down, you had phone calls, you had follow-up messages. You brought in people from around the world to work on this problem. Is the president doing that for those Americans who are stranded in Israel? And if he is, why are there so many Americans who are still stranded in Israel?
Jen, your recollection, unsurprisingly, is correct. It was 125,000 individuals whose departure from Afghanistan, whose evacuation was facilitated during those weeks in August prior to the U.S. military withdrawal at the end of that month. And that was no small logistical feat. You're right that we flew people out on U.S. military aircraft, on allied aircraft. We found overland routes for them to travel to neighboring countries. We provided them step-by-step directions to reach the Kabul International Airport. We bussed them into the airport. For those who were unable to reach a bus, we would get on the phone with them and tell them precisely where to go and sort of walk with them, talk them through the route to get to the airport. Some will agree with the strategic decision to leave Afghanistan to end America's longest war. Clearly, some disagree, think we should still be fighting and dying. Successive generations should be in Afghanistan. But the effort that the Biden administration put together, this whole of government effort, ultimately did and ultimately was the largest scale evacuation ever administered by the U.S. government in modern times. Now, I hate to say it, but the Trump administration has failed to uphold what is its highest responsibility and what even it says is its highest priority, and that is the safety and security of American citizens overseas. We are now talking, you and I, on Wednesday, and the hostilities between Iran and Israel have been ongoing for nearly a week. Bombs, drones, missiles have been raining down on Israel for nearly a week. And it was just about 3 hours ago that our ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, tweeted for the first time that the U.S. Embassy and the broader U.S. State Department would start to put together plans for aerial evacuations and evacuations by boat. That is a complete dereliction of the responsibility of the ambassador, of the Secretary of State, of the State Department leadership. This should be their top priority. This has been going on for nearly a week. More important, the United States government has known for, say, weeks, maybe longer, maybe months, that this conflict would break out. And they are acting like they were caught entirely flat-footed. That should not be the case. We've talked about Israel. There's also another even more difficult challenge, and that's American citizens, including many dual American citizens in Iran. As I understand it, there has been absolutely no guidance provided to American citizens in Iran. And of course, we don't have an embassy there, and there are some other very complex challenges. But the legwork has just not been done. I've heard from Americans who have tried to make contact with the State Department for relatives in Israel, in some cases for relatives in Iran. And in many cases, they are getting the Heisman. I sure hope that Ambassador Huckabee is right, that in the coming days, we'll see the start of this operation, but it should not be starting nearly a week and perhaps much more than a week after this conflict began.
Well, it is stunning, and it might have something to do with the fact that they allowed a South African billionaire to come in and willy-nilly start cutting positions and slicing off agencies and sending people home. Now it turns out those people had real jobs and may have come in useful when it comes to tracking down hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans who are in Israel. So you came into office with the Bidens at a time where you said the State Department had been hollowed out. It will be a miracle if anything is left for the next administration after this. It's horrifying.
You know, Jen, I fear that's right. And it also strikes me that this type of services, this type of service for American citizen services, as we call them in the State Department, is really the bread and butter of our operations. It is the core blocking and tackling of what the State Department is always supposed to be doing. The fact that they haven't done the bare minimum in this case, it gives me absolutely no confidence that they will be able to pull off, and by they, I mean the broader US government, the much more ambitious ideas we're hearing about a large-scale military operation, potentially plans for regime change, even if they embark on a real concerted diplomatic push. This is all in some ways much more complex than what should just be a logistical operation. Yes, a complex one, but one that the State Department has done before on a much larger scale. If they can't do this, Jen, I don't have faith, I don't have confidence that they'll be able to pull off much of what they're talking about more broadly.
Well, I think as people know, and they've certainly seen maps in the papers and on television, we have many, many assets in the region, individuals, civilians, military equipment. That would all become fair game if we become a combatant. Do you see any sign that this administration has planned for this, has shut that down, has pulled out civilians out of other targets, has rearranged troops, has done the simple blocking things that one would do to protect our forces in the event we do go to war?
That's my big concern, that right now this is a war between Israel and Iran. In a pretty remarkable statement from Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, USAID Administrator, and National Archivist Marco Rubio, on the day this began, that was the key statement. This is a unilateral operation that Israel has chosen to undertake against Iran. The United States was in no way involved in it. Now, of course, that may well be changing, but my big concern is that if we do get involved, that the Iranians may very foolishly seek to go after our significant, sizable assets in the region, our embassies, our military bases, our outposts, perhaps even private American citizens who live in the region, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. It is a target-rich environment. to your question, look, we did see some movement of individuals in the hours before this began, and I emphasize hours. It was just a couple days before Israel launched this operation, when the State Department drew down some of our forces from our embassy in Baghdad, other diplomatic outposts in Iraq and the broader region. The military moved some assets around, but again, the United States government has known for days, weeks, perhaps months, by some accounts, that something like this was brewing and that it increasingly was becoming an inevitability. The fact that we started these drawdowns, as they are called, within hours that the conflict began, to me is a total abdication of what should be our top responsibility. Yes, of course, you don't want to draw down into make large moves that could engender panic if actually nothing was going to happen, or that could have implications for the broader region. But there was a way to do this responsibly that ultimately was not taken. And to ultimately start these moves within hours of the first missiles flying, Jen, that is just, it is a true disservice to our men and women in uniform, to our diplomats, and to the many thousands, tens of thousands of private Americans who live in the region.
Well, if people had any doubt that the federal government is important to the ordinary lives of Americans, businesses, remember we have businesses throughout the Middle East, throughout the region, individuals, people who are tourists, people who are there on business, people who are expats, people who are dual nationals. If they had any doubt that the State Department and all the other agencies of government perform critical tasks to keep Americans safe, to keep them healthy, to keep them really free and allowed to live their lives, you need look no further than this to see that when you go around decimating government, you're going to wind up putting Americans in danger. And sadly, I think we're seeing that. And listen, perhaps if there were another administration, perhaps if we had exhausted the diplomatic trade, perhaps if we had a competent Secretary of State, if we had a competent Secretary of Defense, if we had a Director of National Intelligence that was credible, if we had a president with good judgment, you might say, well, I trust these people to make an informed decision. Does anyone in their right mind trust this crew? So,
I think you will have to look far and wide. One of the most unbelievable, and in fact, I wish it truly were not believable, elements that I've learned in the past 24 hours is that apparently the only way Tulsi Gabbard could express her concern over what she saw coming was to release a cryptic video following her visit to Hiroshima about the warmongering elites who were going to lead us into nuclear annihilation. And now when all of us saw this and were quite perplexed that this video came out of the blue just a week or so ago, I think many of us assumed this was just, crazy Tulsi talking about Russia, Ukraine again, and our support for our Ukrainian partners. It actually seems like this was aimed squarely at the emerging dialogue and consensus within the Trump administration about Iran. And rather than provide her guidance, as the DNI has the right and actually the responsibility to do to the commander-in-chief, the only outlet, or perhaps the most effective outlet that she had to turn to, was this kooky video. I think that says a lot about the state of the decision makers within the United States government today.
This really does fall within that category of, can you imagine if President fill in the blank, Obama, yep, Biden, even one of the Bushes, Reagan, anybody else had done this?
Yep. ...
Well, Ned, as always, you are clear, concise, helpful, and very, very accessible. So we thank you for your insight. We're going to be following this just like you are, and I imagine it's a lot more relaxing not to be in that briefing room on a daily basis.
More relaxing, but I wish the world were far less concerning. It's hard to relax in this environment, unfortunately, but it's always good to see you, Jen, and thank you for what you're doing to shine a spotlight on this.
Absolutely. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.